So we interview a lot of folks who wear a lot of different hats, but it's particularly challenging for me anyway to sit down with somebody who wears my hat, that of a journalist, and particularly somebody who has done it well. But before we get into all that, state senator, former state senator, current mayor of Camden, former state representative, Vincent Sheheen, you have worn so many hats in South Carolina politics over the years, coming from a family that's incredibly influential in Palmetto politics. But I want to ask you, before we get into your media expertise, which hat do you like wearing? Which one of those hats fits best?
Yeah, I was blessed to play a number of roles, but clearly for me, being the mayor is the most fun. I'm having a great time being the mayor of the town I love, Camden, South Carolina. Just a wonderful city in our state, and it's been a whole new experience serving in office as a nonpartisan official, which is also just a blessing. And being around people that you love and care for and that you know, plus the added bonus that I'm always only a minute or two away from my home, which is a really great thing.
So you're saying you don't miss the State House?
I don't miss the State House. Serving in the State Senate was an incredible blessing and honor in the State House of Representatives. I mean, I wouldn't have traded it for the world, but I wouldn't go back for the world either, truthfully, right now. I'm having a lot of fun and hopefully doing a lot of good.
No doubt. And I want to ask you about some of the good you're doing here in Camden, just an unbelievable town. I've been here a few times in the last couple of weeks. I mean, you got something really special here. I want to ask you about that. I also want to ask you some partisan questions. But before we get into that, I want to ask you just a question. As somebody who has succeeded on just, I don't know what you and Joel Lurie, your former senatorial colleague, I don't know what you guys thought you were going to do when you started your Bourbon in the Back Room podcast, but this thing has exploded. This is like the go-to political show in the state. Kind of makes me a little jealous.
Yeah, right.
When you started it, did you ever think it would turn into what it's turned into?
I don't think so. And we're glad to have you on the show on multiple occasions and want you to come back to Bourbon in the Back Room, our podcast. Yeah, we have a great time with it. When I called Joel and said we should do this, well, it was really a way to do two things. One was to stay in touch with our friends in state government. Number two, it was to let the public know about what's happening in South Carolina's government and who these people are. Because as you know, but for your coverage and maybe a couple other people's, there is little coverage of state government anymore. And I think that's really important. And I guess the third thing that we wanted to accomplish was showing that government doesn't have to be partisan. And so we're really proud on our show that we have Republicans and Democrats, and we talk about things in a way that aren't partisan. So I think that's important. And did I think a lot of people would listen to it? I don't know. I think I just wanted to do it for fun, and having people listen to it has really been rewarding, and I'm enjoying it.
When you get to do it with one of your best friends, I mean, Joel, you guys are like, I love the interplay between the two of y'all, and you're right, it is a very open, free-flowing kind of combo, not partisan, not, you know.
Yeah, but hopefully informative, and mostly it is really about letting listeners learn about people like you who cover state government, people who make decisions like Merle Smith, Speaker of the House. And then we'd love to have some historical figures on there as well to talk about what's happened. I mean, we did an episode with Dick Riley that was just amazing to me, talking about his 50 plus years in public service. So that's a lot of fun. And again, you know, shows like that and then your coverage are more important now about state government than ever because there's so little coverage of state government.
Let me ask you a question. Being on that side of the mic or being on this side, which is more comfortable for you? Are you more at ease if you're asking the questions or getting the questions?
You know, at this point in my life, it's like the same thing.
Yeah. Okay.
I don't even know that I know the difference, and maybe that's good, maybe that's bad. I don't know. But as you get older, you just don't worry about a lot of things you used to worry about, and you just kind of do it.
Yeah, man. Well, let's talk a little bit about this town. I want to get into how you decided to run for mayor, the calculus that went into all of that. But before we kind of dive into that, this is obviously an incredibly special place for you. You've got tons of history here.
Yes.
Tell people a little bit about not only your history with Camden, but Camden's broader history for South Carolina and the country.
Yeah, well, I'll start with my family because I know it best, and then I'd love to talk about Camden itself. But my family came here in the late 1800s, I think 1895. Abraham, interestingly enough, Sheheen, very biblical name, came here from Lebanon, and he and his brother and sister actually had come into the port. They were young, you know, teenagers, early 20s. They had come into the port of New York and walked here. And they didn't come here specifically for a reason. They were selling things on the side of the dirt roads from New York to South Carolina.
They made that journey by foot?
They did for over a year. And basically we're just kind of, it's what happened back in the day, right? It's the 1800s. They would sell they'd buy dry goods, they'd sell them. They'd camp out in farm fields or barns that farmers let them stay. Actually, the sister came later, so this would have been the two brothers. And then when they arrived at Camden, I think it was well after a year, for whatever reason, they fell in love with it and decided, we don't need to keep walking, we don't need to keep exploring this country, we'll stay here. And they created a little grocery store called Sheheen Grocery, which was still around when I was a kid. And they became an important part of the community. And to me, that's exactly what makes America great. And it's exactly what makes a city like Camden great. And it's why I'm an optimist in my political life, and I'm not one of these haters that you see in both parties so often. And then my grandfather owned a gas station. You know, he didn't go to college. They couldn't afford to send their children to college. But he was very successful and became the mayor of Camden in 1964, which turns out was exactly 60 years before I was elected. And we were exactly the same age, which I didn't know until I looked into that. He and I were really close. And my dad was a businessman here, my uncles, my mom was a school teacher. So the family has just stayed here and thrived. And again, I think that's what's great about a country like America and a state like South Carolina and a little city like Camden. The city itself is an amazing city, yeah. And you know, growing up here, I think probably like other people in South Carolina, you know, you don't really know the history, frankly. But what I learned when I was elected to the House and then to the Senate was Camden in South Carolina is incredibly rich in history, especially the Revolutionary War history. And I like to say, and it's part of what I say to visitors now and why everyone who listens to your show should come visit Camden, is that the Revolutionary War may have been started in Boston, Massachusetts, or in Massachusetts. It may have been won in Virginia when Cornwallis surrendered to George Washington. It was won here in South Carolina, and a lot of that started in Camden. Cornwallis was encamped here. Nathaniel Greene was a general who came here and fought Cornwallis. We had Francis Marion, of course, who was fighting in this area against the British, Thomas Sumter. And really, we forced the British Army out of South Carolina, out of Camden, and they ended up moving up the coast and surrendered to George Washington in Virginia. So we are really focused in Camden on telling that story. It's a wonderful story, a story we should be proud of. And we have an incredible mix of a population. You know, there's a rich African-American history here. Mm-hmm. There was a rich immigrant history here, which my family was a part of that. And before all that, a story we don't tell very often is the Native American story. And this was a huge Native American settlement. When the Spaniards came here in the 1600s, they found this settlement here, and the results weren't good. But that was a rich community, and on top of our City Hall here, we're very proud to have a Native American figure, King Hagler.
When you were telling me earlier a little bit about how you have studied other cities and how they have embraced their Revolutionary War history, taken some notes on them, tell us a little bit about that, some of your travels and what you've learned and what you're trying to implement here.
So Will, when I was in the state Senate, you know, I observed the state's economic development focus, and it really was this, from what I could tell: recruit big out-of-state and out of America businesses, hope they open a manufacturing facility, give them a bunch of money, give them a bunch of land, give them low taxes, get low wages, and call that success. And the truth is, that doesn't build wealth. So I'm not saying there's not a role for that. There is. But if that's your focus, you're not going to be successful in building wealth, especially in small town South Carolina. We've got to have a different approach. And so our approach is to have a high quality of life where people want to come and visit, spend their money, and then come back, where people want to live and be successful, where young people are attracted, because we don't see that in small town South Carolina. To me, that means a vibrant tourism economy. Mm-hmm. And here it's outdoors. You know, we have equestrian, we have the Wateree River, we've developed a lot of outdoor activity, history, arts, and then cool restaurants, bars, specialty shops, things that will drive people to come visit here. That way small business can thrive. That way families can thrive. And that's really what we've been doing here. This idea that there's going to be a savior, you know, big mega plant that's going to locate in around a small town, you just can't count on it. It's great if it happens, but that's not a plan.
So it feels like you're saying a lot of folks have embraced this kind of top-down approach. Your approach sounds like seeding and building things from the ground up.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, there's a role for government in it. I'm the mayor for a reason, right? Because local government needs to be an active part of this occurring. But in my private business, prior to being elected to the mayor, I also did downtown development. I helped to buy buildings and renovate them, and most importantly, find ways to partner with operators to operate successful businesses in them. And that's something that government just can't do. Like, you have to have the private sector doing that. But in a city like Camden, the government plays a crucial role in helping to encourage that, incentivize that, building a feel in the community that people want to be a part of and have a successful business. And that's what we're focused on. And that means that we're easy to work with. So, when small businesses want to come and rehab a building and open a new business, we want our permitting to be we don't want to be rigid. We want it to be flexible, but still rules-based, but then give them service, right? Like, they don't need to be waiting around on us to come permit stuff. We need to go do it, right? And if they have a problem, we tell them that they need to fix it. But government can be a hurdle, or it can be something that makes things work, and we want to make it work.
Well, I wanted to ask you about that because obviously we go all over the state,
Right.
cover all towns of all shapes, sizes, locations. Some of the places we've been are not thriving the way that Camden is. They're not experiencing this, it's like a renaissance almost.
Right.
But what advice would you give to some of the mayors in these smaller towns that are really struggling with the loss of the old school mills, the old school, whether it was NAFTA, CAFTA,
Right.
whatever put them under?
Right. The old textile-based economy, and when that went away, what happened to these small towns?
What would you tell the leaders in those towns? How do they turn it around?
Yeah, and when I was in the Senate, I represented some of these towns that really struggle, and Camden was struggling. Let's face it. If you drove through Camden 15 years ago, there was still activity, but it was nothing like what you see today. First of all, you have to think about what you do well and what makes you different. And you have to capitalize on that, right? And the opportunity is here now because people are moving to the state. So if you are an attractive place for whatever it is that you do well, whether it is here where we have tourism and horses, or maybe it is in another area, outdoor recreation, or maybe it is small industries of certain types. What do you do well? Focus on that, have a plan, build it out. Don't be afraid to ask for help. There's a role for the state to play, the federal government to play, private businesses to play. But focus on what you do well and have a plan to do it. And then if you're the government, figure out how your government can be a helper, not a hindrance, right? Mm-hmm. Nothing frustrates me more than bad government, because I believe in government. And when government sucks, it pisses me off.
How do you balance it though? Because so many places like Newberry, for example, great town, but they make it very clear, we want you to visit and spend some money here, but we don't really want you to stay.
Right.
How do you balance that and what you're trying to do here?
That's the toughest thing. Yeah, because we don't want to grow at such a clip that we turned into Northeast Columbia. Great, if you live in Northeast Columbia, but that's not Camden.
Grew up there.
Yeah, right. We don't want to be Mount Pleasant. Mount Pleasant is completely different now than it was 10, 15 years ago. It's okay for people who've moved there. Yet we don't want to be stuck. We don't want to stay the same. So that's a real challenge. I want kids to be able to live here and be able to afford to buy a house, yet I don't want crap being built in the community. So you do have to have standards, you have to set them, you have to think about it. For Camden, what I think it means is that we encourage growth in the downtown core community. Let's make this city walkable. Let's make people be able to build apartments here, condos here, townhomes here, make a real thriving city. Do we need a bunch of sprawly stuff that we see in other places? Probably not. That's not what Camden's about. So finding ways to grow, right? Mm-hmm. But at the same time, preserving what you had. Now, that's hard to do. I don't want to say it's easy. And right now, we have a moratorium on housing that I inherited when I was elected. The previous administration had implemented. We renewed it for 6 months. And during that 6 months, we're doing this planning. And then the moratorium is going to go away, and we want people to be able to come here and grow in the way that the city has thoughtfully set the rules for. I believe government creates the rules, and then you turn people loose to play in them.
Yeah. We're in this beautiful town hall, in the room where a lot of the citizens, they voice these concerns. What do you hear from folks, like when you're sitting here with your fellow members of city government? What are the concerns that folks are relaying to you guys right now as it relates to the things they're dealing with in their lives that they want to see from their leaders, whether it's local or obviously you've got connections on up that chain from your power service?
Yeah.
What are you hearing from them about what they're concerned about?
Well, this room is special to me. This was actually the room where I held my first public office. When I came back to Camden, I was a part-time city prosecutor. Oh, wow. And this city council chamber also serves as our municipal court, and I was the prosecutor here. So this room is a fun place to be. And when I'm in this room now as the mayor, I do hear a lot of concerns about growth. Mm-hmm. I hear from a lot of citizens who come forward and say, we want to maintain what's special in Camden, and how do we do that? And so I hear that. I also hear from a lot of small businesses that say we need to make sure that city government works with us so that we can be successful. And there's a variety of things that they bring to us. But small business is very important in a community like this to be successful. So I hear from them a lot. And then, I just hear people's everyday concerns. The city of Camden operates the electric utility. I hear our electric bills are too high. What can you do to help us control the electric bills that, ultimately the city has the responsibility to do because we own the electric company. I hear from people, on everyday concerns like there's a pothole in my road. There's an intersection that's not safe. This road needs to get paved, and that's part of what we do. I know a lot of elected officials gripe about that. I've got great staff that helps me with those. It's not like I'm out there paving streets, but that's part of why we're here. And then I hear super creative ideas from people about how we can strengthen the arts in a city like Camden. How we can do things differently, have festivals, invite people to come and spend their dollars and their time and their joy. So it's a lot of fun.
When you've done some things to endear yourself, not only to the citizens you represent, but also the folks that work with you, giving your salary back, routing that money into what was an employee of the month. So you're basically giving your salary to folks working for you. You had a private mayor's bathroom that apparently you turned into, it's like now the coffee hangout for the whole building. So it's pretty cool stuff.
Yeah, I think it's sometimes, the little things matter, right? I wanted our workforce, we've had a lot of new employees come, new leadership to the city, which is exciting, but I wanted them to know the mayor's got their back. The mayor believes in what they do. And sometimes you just do that in small ways. So I was able to donate my salary back to the city, and we give $1,000 a month bonus to an employee who's gone above and beyond the call of duty. To me, that's important, right? I'm happy for people to get cost of living increases to keep up with inflation, but you should reward excellence. So this was a way for us to really reward excellence. And yeah, the bathroom was funny. The mayor, for whatever reasons, was a private bathroom for the mayor, which is fine, but I don't need a private bathroom. This is a part-time job. And one of the employees came to me when I was first elected, and she said, we've never had a coffee pot for the employees to a coffee pot. So then my administrator said, how about we turn your private bathroom, because I told him I didn't need it, into a coffee station. And so that's fun. That's great stuff. And and plus I get a good cup of coffee now when I come to City Hall.
But now that makes you have to go to the bathroom. You gotta walk up the stairs.
We got two bathrooms. We're good. We got that covered.
Let me ask you about this. So you mentioned your prior service in the Senate, and I remember one of the first articles I ever wrote about you was the old green truck.
Yeah.
And it was kind of that you travel all over the district when you ran statewide.
Yeah.
Two-time nominee for governor of South Carolina. I want to ask you about that in just a second. But you told me a story a moment ago about that truck. It's kind of an omen maybe of one of your recent political races, but I wanted to ask you a question about the races that you've been in. You've been in so many different elections, different levels, local, Senate districts, state level. Do you learn more from the races you win, or do you learn more from the races that you lose?
That's a great question. And I'll preface my answer by saying my dad was in politics and lost every race he ran for. And I learned from him and learned from that you shouldn't run for office if you're not okay with losing. And a lot of my peers were not okay with losing. It crushed them when they lost a race. And I've won some amazing races, including the nomination for governor when I was selected as the Democratic nominee for governor and against a number of opponents. And then I've lost some. And I'd probably say that you learn more about life from the losses. You learn more about life from the losses, and you also learn what really matters. And I've got a lot of stories about that. But I like winning, so winning's cool. Winning's a lot of fun.
But tell this truck. So you were running for Senate.
Yeah, so I was running for well, let me again start that conversation by saying I had been thinking about running for mayor for a number of years, probably for about 10 years. And it is something that I wanted to do. Once I did not successfully become the governor of South Carolina, which I would have loved to have been and felt like we could have done a lot of great things. One of the things as my Senate career, as I achieved what I wanted in the Senate, when I achieved the goals I had, I began thinking about running for mayor. Our mayor was a good friend of mine. And she wanted to run for one more term. And so I ran for the Senate again when I probably wouldn't have. And I had my truck that I had since before I was a senator. It was a 20 plus year old F-150 green truck. I love driving it around. Anyway, I knew that Senate race was going to be tough, mostly because my district was very Republican and I was a Democrat, and Donald Trump was on the ballot and he was extremely popular, and people were really just coming in and voting straight party ticket.
Perfect storm.
Yeah, and so that day I always would drive around to all the precincts, and I drove the big green truck. And I went to one of my precincts and went in to talk to the poll workers, went to get back in the truck, and it was broken down and it wasn't cranking back up.
On election day.
On election day at a precinct. So I called one of my buddies, and I was like, "You need to come pick me up because it doesn't look good." and that truck sat out there on that road in front of that precinct all that day into the next day until we got it towed off. And I said, "You know what? This is the end of an era. It's the end of me in the Senate. It's the end of this truck." So that was that. And I bought a new old truck.
Your campaign, particularly your first gubernatorial campaign against Nikki Haley, obviously she's gone on at the national level to do some pretty impressive things. No one can argue with her skill as a politician. You nearly knocked her off as a Democrat, and I wanted to ask you about that race first, and then I want to ask you in a more broader sense some advice you might give to Democrats running moving forward. But tell us a little bit about that race against Nikki Haley, the 2010 race. Were there moments you felt like we're going to pull this off? We're going to win this race? I mean,
yeah, that was pretty surreal. I will say, though, that one of the first people that said I should run for governor was a guy named Will Folks, who was the PR person for Mark Sanford at the time. And I remember walking through the State House, and I think Tommy Moore was running for governor that year. And you were like, it was me and Joel, and you're like, you know what? One of you guys needs to run for governor. But when Haley and I ran against each other in 2010, you have to remember she was a State House member. I was a state senator. Although the state had become pretty heavily Republican, we had had a Democratic governor, who had won 12 years before in '98, Jim Hodges. So people still felt like a Democrat could win, although it would be very hard. I think the thing I didn't realize then, which has become even more so now, is the nationalization of politics had really, really set in. So the main thing I learned in that race was you only impact about 5% of the vote, because the rest of it's baked in based on how people are viewing national politics.
Really?
And the fact that we were able to get so close that year, in a year when really a Democrat should not have been anywhere close, was a great lesson to learn.
It was a Tea Party year. The pendulum was very much shifting against the Democratic Party.
We were one of the closest races in America, and that was in South Carolina, right? So I also learned that within that 5%, you can make a difference, right? Like, we moved some of that number. I should have lost probably by 10 points that year. Yeah. Mark Sanford was a drag on Nikki Haley's side, and Barack Obama was a drag on my side, and the question was who was going to be a greater drag. And I probably should have focused, frankly, more on Mark Sanford. Haley was very astute in focusing on Barack Obama. I mean, the campaign she ran against me was not about me, it was about Barack Obama, and that was a smart political move. It was frustrating for me. But losing that race also taught me, okay, I lost, big deal. Like, there's a lot of good things I can still do. And most of my platform, oddly enough, was then subsequently adopted because Haley was trying to outflank me on those issues. So she then supported 4-year-old kindergarten expansion. She supported creating the Inspector General, which was something that I had talked about for years. And ultimately,
your structural reform she embraced, as a matter of fact.
Yeah, so we adopted my 2014 Restructuring Act, which literally was Vincent Sheheen's 2014 Government Restructuring Act. I mean, it was, so that was very rewarding. And then ultimately, of course, she came down and supported what had been my signature issue in 2014, which was removing the Confederate flag, sadly, because of the death of my seatmate, Clint Pinckney, the murder. After those things were accomplished, that's, I think, when my interest in the state level started to wane, and I started looking to
come back home, right?
Yeah.
Come back home.
Yeah.
Well, and I wanted to ask you a little bit about what you would say to some of these candidates at the Democratic, whether they're running statewide, whether they're running in some of these districts that are generally not perceived as competitive. And I wanted to start with the U.S. Senate race, because obviously folks have approached you to run for that.
Yeah.
We've also seen Annie Andrews, who ran for Congress a few years back, got beaten very decisively by Nancy Mace. We've now got Joe Walsh, a former Tea Party congressman from Illinois, coming down.
Moving here to run.
Moving here to potentially run against Lindsey Graham as a Democrat.
Right.
What do Democrats have to do to win a statewide race here? It hasn't happened since '98.
Yeah.
Or at least at the top of the ticket level. I think there was a superintendent race that Democrats narrowly won, although that guy left the party later.
Right.
Jim Rex.
When he lost to me in the Democratic primary in 2010, small world, right?
What do Democrats have to do to get back to the level you were at where you're competitive at the statewide level?
Yeah, well, I think because the politics locally is now so nationalized that it's probably not going to happen until you see the Democratic Party change nationally, okay?
What do they have to do? What would you recommend?
Well, I think they need to embrace common sense issues that everyday people care about and not talk about esoteric things that people don't care about. What do I mean by that? What we're doing here in Camden, right? How do small businesses succeed? How do you help people achieve a college education without growing broke if that's what they want to do? How do you have a government that actually works instead of getting in the way? How do you support law enforcement? I mean, the dumbest thing I ever heard or saw was when the Democratic Party basically took on the police, who I'm thrilled to work with in Camden and work very closely with, and I'm so thankful that are here. So until they change that kind of attitude, it's really tough locally to distinguish yourself from the National Democratic Party. But if I was going to be a Democrat, which I'm proudly nonpartisan as the mayor of Camden, and I was running for office, I think there's a valuable lesson to learn from Donald Trump. And I know Democrats don't like to hear this, but when he ran in 2016, the first thing he did was take on the Republican Party. The first thing Donald Trump did that I saw was take on the Republican Party and its establishment. If I was running for office here in South Carolina as a Democrat right now, I would be fearless in doing that. And I would take on the Republican Party too. You know, both parties, when I hear them, they act like they hate America. You know, the Democrats talk about how terrible the history of the country is, how everybody's racist, it's an awful place to be. And the Republicans act like it's the worst country you could live in. They want to make it great. I think it is great. Okay, I think the country is great. They talk about how, you know, cities are in chaos. And the truth is, this is a great freaking country. And if you were a candidate who was running as a Democrat, I'd take on both parties and talk about how insane both of them are.
Is there room nationally and here in South Carolina, and this is something we've heard Elon Musk talk about a great deal, is there room for a third way? Is there room for something to break that sort of partisan? Because it feels to me like so many of these things we talk about, the partisan structure is a big part of the problem.
Yeah, it doesn't accommodate it. I think the history of the country tells me, and I'm writing a book on South Carolina government and politics that'll be coming out this fall, but the history of the country tells me that it's very difficult to make changes outside of the party, that you're generally more successful in making changes by changing the party itself. And again, I'll go to Donald Trump. Anybody who says that Donald Trump has not substantially changed the Republican Party has not been watching. So I think the question is the Democratic Party going to change? And then what does the Republican Party ultimately become? I think it'd be great if there was a third party that could, you know, break that dynamic and kind of have a centrist route, a common sense route maybe. But I think the realistic answer is that those changes generally come from within the two-party structure.
Who could be the Trump on the Democrat side? You mentioned about having to have someone with that kind of force of personality that comes in and just takes on that entrenched establishment, and how if you were advising a Democrat candidate, that'd be one of the things you'd tell them to do.
Right.
Who do you see? Look at South Carolina, but then also look nationally.
Yeah.
Who in the Democrat fold is that kind of person?
I don't think we see anyone right now, just to be frank. And I don't think people saw Donald Trump coming. If you'd asked me that question about the Republican Party in 2014, I would not have said Donald Trump, and I don't know many people that would have. So I think those people emerge when they do emerge. And I think on the Democratic side, it'll be very different. It's not the Donald Trump, right? Because just the makeup of Democrats are different than the makeup of Republicans, but it does have to be a change agent, and I think that's what's important. And I think that there is the opportunity within the Democratic Party for a change agent to emerge, and if I knew who that person was, they would not be a change agent.
There you go. Yeah, kind of comes out of the blue. Mr. Mayor, really appreciate you having us here, inviting us. I mean, you're doing something incredibly special here.
So much fun.
Tell folks they want to come to Camden, they want to experience this, whether visiting, whether looking to stay here. Where do they go? Tell us how do we got a QR code, or what can we put up here to?
Yeah, it's an amazing place. I want everybody to come visit. Go to our website. There's a great list of activities that are going on and places to visit. But when you come right off the interstate off of I-20, please stop in at the Revolutionary War Visitor Center. It's an amazing place that tells the story of the Revolutionary War in Camden, in the backcountry, in the South, where the Revolutionary War really was won. And then there's a whole display of things you can do in Camden and in Kershaw County, whether it be hanging out on the Wateree River, visiting our parks, going to the wonderful bars and restaurants, or spending the night. Love to have people come and visit. And if you need something from the mayor, just email me. My email address is on our website. Will, it's great to have you in town.
Oh man, I love being here. Thanks for all you're doing for this town, for the folks here. And I tell you what, if you get a chance, spread this message around the state. I think there's some towns that need to hear it.
Amen.
You're doing great
Thank
work.
you. Appreciate
Thank
it.
you, Mr. Mayor.
Yes, sir.